I'm Roger Andrew Delisle Everest, and my mother lodge is Wellington Lodge. I now really spend most of my time with Te Awamutu Lodge here in Taupo. Well, let me start at the very beginning, I guess. My Masonic beginning was my father was retired into a place called Alderney in the Channel Islands, and I used to go and visit him when I was working. And one time I went to see him and I said, tell me, how do I become a Mason? And he said, I thought you'd never ask. Those were the days, of course, when nobody said anything to anybody about joining Masonry. You really had to go the whole mile by yourself to get there. Anyway, I carried on with my trip around Europe, and he wrote to his lodge in Shropshire, who wrote to Grand Lodge in London, who wrote to District Grand Lodge in Auckland. Worship Brother Eddie Gibb was the secretary at that time, who wrote to Worship Brother Bardi Alford in Wellington. And by the time I got home, Bardi Alford was knocking on my door saying, understand you'd like to join Masonry. So that was really how it started. 1982, I was initiated into Wellington Lodge. I then became the worshipful master 13 years later, in 1995. Now that's how long it took again in Wellington Lodge to do anything. There was such a queue. I also joined the Aorangi chapter, and the Aorangi Mark Lodge and Mariner Lodge while I was still in Wellington. Just after I had done my stint as worshipful master and immediate past master, I was promoted, I guess you'd say, from my company in Auckland, from Wellington to Auckland, where I became managing director of a company called TCL Marketing. I think probably at that time I'd have to say that my Masonic career really did take a lift off. Joined Te Awamutu Lodge in Auckland, still maintained my lodge in Wellington. I was one of the first members of Port Chalmers Marine Lodge in the North Island when it came up from Port Chalmers. Worshipful Brother Bruce McMurtry and I were number 1 and number 2 of the joining. I'm still a member. I also joined Northern Light. That was when they moved from Whangarei to Auckland. And I also joined the Potiki Lodge. I was made the president of the Board of General Purposes in 2002, and it's a job that I did for 4 years. And Right Worshipful Brother Peter Gudsell would have had me there for another year if I'd let him, but I said no, I didn't. 4 years is enough for anybody in that job. It's a tough job, but a very satisfying job, really good. It was about in the middle of that I was given Grand Rank. Invitation to Grand Rank arrived by mail here in this house in Taupo, my 60th birthday. And it came in a sort of birthday card sized envelope, a square envelope about that big. And I thought, oh, this is nice of Grand Lodge, they've remembered my birthday. And I opened it up and there was this invitation to be, or to receive Grand Rank. And I have to say that was probably one of the highlights of my career in Masonry was that. I met Helene, my wife, in Port Elizabeth, and we got married in Port Elizabeth. And it was at that time that I decided that I would join IBM, and I had to do, in those days you had to do all sorts of IQ tests and stuff, and so anyway that was okay, and I joined IBM in Johannesburg. We were there for 5 years, and to be honest, it was at a time when apartheid was still very strong, and we were not really that enamored with apartheid, to be honest. plus the fact that we lived in Johannesburg and we lived south of the mine dumps, and the mine dumps in the dry season would blow dust and was not a very pleasant place. And the reality was that if I was to continue on with my computer career in IBM, I was going to have to stay in Johannesburg. So Helene and I decided that we would emigrate, and we had three choices really. I was quite at that time interested in Brazil and Japan. Now this is 45 years ago, so you've got to know what sort of thinking went on at that time. But those were the two outside choices, and then Australia and New Zealand was the other choice. We eventually, with cutting a long story short, we got on the boat in Cape Town with 400 pounds and arrived in Wellington in August 1972. In those days you could get a job. In those days we didn't need visas or anything, we just walked off the boat. Helene got a job on the Monday and I got a job on the Thursday. I was in those days working for Mobil Oil. IBM heard that I was in town, if you like, and they approached me and I went to join them. In IBM they were offering me to send me to San Jose in California to do work on some software and hardware that was being introduced. Really fancy that, I must admit. And going from a company of IBM size, which was about 400,000 people worldwide, to a company which had 4 people. This is now what I call TCL marketing. We were importers of chemicals and plastics and rubber and food and all sorts of things. Packaging. And then I was made managing director of TCL in Auckland. So we had to move up to Auckland, and that coincides roughly with what I was talking about in my Masonic career. I'd like to think that it is, because I'm a bit of a traditionalist, and I like the ceremony of the differences, and so I want us to stay related to England. I don't want us to join with anyone else, not New Zealand or Scottish or Irish. I love to see those guys coming into our lodges in their different regalia and doing different signs and all things, and going and visiting them and seeing their ritual and things is different to ours. And that is super. That is really good. That's how it should be. I think it would be deadly boring if we were all the same. So as a traditionalist, I want us to stay related to London. I do, absolutely. Plus the fact that it gives us another string to our bow to give people an incentive to perform by offering grand rank to those that do the job. And masonry at that time was just seeing my dad with his little brown leather bag, one night a month, off he'd go, and he wouldn't tell us anything where he was going or what he was going to do. And I can just imagine now what a lot of fun it must have been for him. So yeah.